Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Joining the Dots and Managing Your Mantras. My name is Holly, and I'm part of the professional development team here at IIRSM. Your speaker today is IIRSM Fellow and finalist for this year's Mentor of the Year Award, Graham Wailes. As some of you will know, we were due to run this webinar on Wednesday, but due to a technical problem that I was unable to resolve at the time, we had to postpone. Apologies if this caused any inconvenience for anyone. Fingers crossed there'll be no other issues getting in the way today, as I assure you we've not had to postpone a webinar before. Before I hand over to Graham, there are just a few things to run through first. So to begin with, you should see to the right of your screen a toolbar with various options. As the microphone shows, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Feel free to ask any questions or make any comments using the questions area, and we will take 5 to 10 minutes to respond to these at the end of Graham's presentation. If you need any support using GoToWebinar, the I symbol will take you to the support site. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IIRSM YouTube channel after the event. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Graham. Please bear with me whilst there's a short pause.
Good morning and welcome to Joining the Dots and Managing Your Mantras. I'm Graham Wailes. I'm a fellow of the Institute. I would have been doing this joint with Andrew Morris today, but Andrew's got a bit on. He's in the process of changing jobs. So like all good safety people, we're working it out and getting the job done anyway. So you'll be with me for around 45 minutes and then we'll have some questions at the end. So a little bit about me to begin with. I started my working life 38 years ago with a company called ICI. After 11 years with them, the site I was on was taken over by a company called DuPont. I did 11 years with those. Various roles with those two companies before then moving on to a safety consulting role with a small consultancy, and then back into a corporate role in assurance work with Cadbury Schweppes, and then into a major corporate role with Aggregate Industries, before then going and working overseas based in Switzerland with their parent company, the Holcim Group. So all in all, so I've done my 10,000 hours. I've got plenty of experience and exposure, and you'll be pleased to know that in the course of that 38 years, I have also taken the appropriate qualifications and had some accreditations, won the odd award here and there. So hopefully you'll be reassured that you're with somebody that has got a bit of experience and knows a little bit about what they're talking about. In the course of that 38 years, obviously you start at the beginning learning an awful lot from people, then you go on to practicing a bit, then you go on to teaching a little bit and engaging with others. And all I've really had to do throughout that time is keep my eyes open, my ears open, and most importantly, my mind open to see what you can learn and what you can apply. And what we're going to go through in the next 40 minutes or so is a bit like Forrest sat on the bench. We're going to take you through some things that I've practiced, some of the life experiences I've had. We're going to see about what I call joining the dots. So bringing some of the different ideas that I've seen work, also stuff that I've learned from stuff that hasn't worked as well. Because there's lots of things about. There's stuff that is classed as fairly traditional, some stuff based in regulation. There's new material, which is very, very popular at the moment. And my thought is that, you know, as long as we can master 3 particular areas of safety, we should do okay. Firstly, we need to understand the things that have happened, and we have systems and processes for that. Then we need to be able to recognize the things that are happening around us. And if we understand those 2 things, we should then be able to influence the things that we need to happen going forward. So that's enough about me. Let's start with the first view we're going to talk about is bits about behavior, how we influence behavior. So my first understanding of safety was fairly simple. There are tasks to be performed. We get people to perform those tasks, and occasionally people get injured doing that. And that was my first experience of safety. You know, minor injuries that I suffered during my early working life were all pretty consistent with the tasks I was performing. It seemed to make intuitive sense. And then after I'd been doing sort of a job of work and my maintenance for a while, I got involved in safety bits. I got invited onto investigations, onto little projects, and I was keen to learn more about safety. So a very interesting question came up that puzzled me and troubled me a little bit. So if injuries are directly related to tasks, how is it that some companies that perform similar tasks end up with different results? And perhaps more importantly, I was thinking about what can I work out how to ensure that the company I'm working for can continue doing similar tasks with similar people and change the results it was getting. To talk you through, I'm going to use a case study from my background. So the industrial business in the UK. Factory one I'm going to talk about is the ICI nylon plant in Doncaster in the north of England. And factory two is the DuPont nylon factory in Doncaster in the north of England. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted that this in fact is the same factory. And it is, and that makes it perfect for a case study of this nature, because we've got the same people, the same equipment, the same processes, the same hazard profile. But we're going to look at this period around the transition to see about, what can we learn from that process to improve our safety. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the extrusion floor of the ICI factory. And what you can see there is the general infrastructure, its hot processors. You see the guy wearing his ICI issued trousers, and you can get a general sense of it's a decent enough place to work. A different angle from pretty much the same place. So now pointing down towards into the main extrusion floor, you can see that it's close to the process. So that yarn that he's having to tidy up to throw away will be reasonably warm. It's a hot process. You can see that he's wearing his own cotton t-shirt and his own joggy bottoms. In this picture will show you a bit more about, it's reasonably tidy, but the infrastructure's damaged. You can see a lot of lacking painting, it's dark, you see cables hanging down for the inspection lamps. So you get a general view of, it's a reasonable place to work, but it's certainly far from perfect. And this factory was, it's the second oldest nylon factory in the world, the oldest one in Europe. So it's seen some action. And that was stills taken from a video that we had from the ICI days just before transition. What we're looking at now is stills from a video taken just after transition. So you can see that, this is perhaps a little bit brighter, so a bit more effort put into the lighting, the painting, the maintenance. Still people carrying out the hazardous activities. But what you're seeing here is you've got choices of blue or purple or grey or what have you. But there is an expectation now that people will wear workwear. And the PPE is slightly of a higher standard. And again, this shot shows you that the same tasks have to be undertaken, but it's a bit brighter, it's a bit more orderly. The trailing cables have gone, so now individuals are trusted to have their own equipment rather than it be permanently fixed in place. So you've got a slight difference there, which is observable when you look back a few years later. So we've got the same products, same processes, same equipment, same people, but a very different injury experience. I wanted to really explore how can we explain that that's occurred. Okay, sorry about that. My equipment froze a little bit. The explanation for that, if we think about the task and the individual component, I was introduced to HSG 65. And that gave us that understanding of the overriding effect that an organisation has on the behaviours of the individual. And that affects the local safety culture. So it's not as simple as turn the lights up a bit and put a coat of paint on. You know, if we think about how a person is selected, inducted, trained, supervised, that'll affect the choices and the decisions they make whilst they're undertaking their tasks. And how that workplace is maintained physically and how group behaviour is led and supervised, either by managers or in some cases by peers, will challenge or reinforce the choices that they make. So at this sort of period of time, I was actually doing my NEBOSH certificate. So I was learning about things like the Swiss cheese model. What it started to feel like was all the different components of the Swiss cheese model sort of fit reasonably into this wider organisation. So lots of things to try and influence us and influence our behaviour, how we're working. And that's what gives us the, if you like, the different injury output. Another model I was introduced to at the time, not through any of the safety work I did, was this, Rogers diffusion curve. I actually developed in the early 1960s, focused on sales. And if we think about it, when we're trying to change the safety culture or make changes like that, there is an aspect of selling to it. Of course, the big difference here is we can't just let people walk away and only focus on the early adopters or the early majority. Our challenge is to actually move the culture of the group that we have, if you like, move them all a bit further onto the positive end. And a good example, perhaps to really get that into some context for you, this is a picture of a wrap on a nylon machine. So in all the time that I worked in the nylon business, wraps were a problem. In the ICI days, I would reckon that in the factory I worked on, at least one person every year lost the tip or a significant portion of a finger trying to remove wraps. The procedure said that you should shut the whole machine down. If you think about that picture with the soft waste that was being removed, when you do that, you create a huge amount of that. So shutting the machine down would be very unpopular. So what had tended to happen in the ICI days was you just got on and did it anyway. People turned a blind eye to it. DuPont's approach was quite different. And that wasn't particularly to shut the machine down either. But what we did do was involve these early adopters, these innovators, and involve them in finding a solution. And what they came up with was a fairly simple tool, didn't cost a lot of money, but meant that you could actually safely remove the wrap without specifically involving your fingers in any of the dangerous moving parts. Because even though that photograph looks static, what you're seeing there is a fast rotating piece of smooth machinery. If you get your fingers into the nylon, there's a big chance it gets changed. So that gives you a specific example of what this model really meant to us in context. And we did see a very different injury experience. Let me give you another case study now to look at. So it's a bit more modern. So our case study now is looking at a large hospital. The task at hand, to publicly recognise and thank the healthcare workers for their efforts during this global pandemic. Seems a reasonable thing to do, isn't it? Our individual, we obviously need somebody of magnitude and importance, so we ask a VIP to do this. Or in this case, a VP. So this is in America. The hospital concerned is the Mayo Clinic, one of the biggest, most famous hospitals in the US. And the individual is the vice president. It just so happens he happens to be the head of the Corona Task Force, so he's got the right level of gravitas. And in terms of making sure we've got the organisation in right, we get the right person, we make sure they have the right briefing, so we know where they're going to arrive, we know they're going to be escorted properly, we tell them what the expectation is around social distancing, around PPE and all those sorts of rules. We make sure the area they're going to go to is really well maintained and clean. We make sure everybody else is aware of all the rules. So this can be really a slick, high profile, positive bit of feedback. Using this model, what could possibly go wrong? Well, that's what went wrong. So that was the evening news. Pence defies Mayo Clinic face mask policy. So if you saw the news clip, what you saw was Mike Pence rocks up, and he must have interacted with around 25 different people. The clip lasts around 5 minutes in its entirety. He's the only person without a mask. There's a recovering patient with a mask. There's all the managers with a mask. All the press with masks. You think, well, how could this have gone so badly wrong? This model, which works perfectly well in a British nylon factory, suddenly gets blown apart by the very people that are supposed to be leading this and working that. That example chimed with what I'd learnt about this model in the years since I'd first applied it. Because what happened 3 weeks before was quite important. Because 3 weeks before, this chap, Mike Pence's boss, did a press conference, and this is a still photograph from that very conference, where he was at pains to point out that although masks were being advised, it was advisory, it was voluntary. And he closed it by saying, I don't think I'll be wearing a mask. So even though on the day in question, when Mike Pence went to visit the clinic 3 weeks later, there's no email saying, whatever you do, don't wear a mask because it'll make me look stupid. If we change the model slightly and add the outer layer that I've got here, so this is my derivative of HSG 65, and I've seen this in industry, the higher levels of the organization can bring significant influence. It doesn't have to be explicit, it doesn't have to be rules, stuff can be implied, but it has an impact on the local management behavior when we do it in an industrial setting. Now, Mike Pence had got all the weight of the Mayo Clinic, all the peer pressure of the people there, yet still he got it wrong. And he knew he'd got it wrong, but it took weeks and weeks before everybody accepted this was really, really wrong. We don't get that in an industrial environment. We don't get that chance to keep going back and revisiting our mistakes. And if we think about our supervisory level managers, they also meet the diffusion curve. They've also got different aspirations, different interests. You know, they're not an homogenous body. We used to laugh and joke. If you got the supervisor's job, they changed the chip in the back of your neck. But that wasn't true. It's still a demographic that would fit this model. So if I think about the diffusion curve and the HSG 65 model and bring them together, this really helped me to understand and join the dots of what I was actually seeing in good quality behavioral interventions. Because what I was seeing was, it wasn't about, is it top down or is it bottom up? It was about really recognizing that we've got 3 distinct layers that are working on the task. And we need our operation and our local management to envelop the task in good quality work, good attitudes, positive behaviors, both of them supported by the strategic leadership. So in terms of recognizing those differences, it was very, very important. Because we do have very different roles at those 3 levels. And you know, I've worked at all of those 3 levels. So at the top, it's okay to set the direction and message, make demands, allocate those resources. So when you go back and you do monitor the actual impact, the local management are the guys at the center of the hourglass. They're the ones that in real time have got to lead this direction and interpret the message. Make sure that those resources are used effectively. It's no good just demanding more if you're not using what you've got effectively. Hopefully then that'll align the operations and they can either reinforce that or challenge it. And that's the job of the local management, to lead that culture in that way. So if we think about joining the dots and the summary points of this, it really isn't about, should I make a choice of top down or bottom up? Which off-the-shelf package do I need to take? Which guru is going to give me the best bang for my buck? My experience of 38 years is that you really need to be heavily involved in the implementation, because in your organization, everybody's behavior is contributing to the whole. and the actions and reactions are affected by those relationships of the different roles. So you really need to think about, how do I have complementary interventions to help the three different roles so that we get an overall improved sustainable culture change. Just a bit of recap on that section. We've taken HSG 65. We've taken a bit of history from the sales world. We've brought them together with a new model, joining the dots, to work out how we can get the best out of our behavioural programs rather than just take something as a project intervention. The next bit I want to work on in terms of joining the dots, these things, relationship triangles. So the traditional triangle model, there's lots of them about. Oops. The basic premise is there's a statistical relationship between large numbers of low consequence right up through a diminishing number of high consequence events, hence the triangle. So let's start with what's good about them. One of the good things is they are intuitively simple. So they're not complicated at all, and they chime with our sort of understanding of life. So if I think of, I've probably come into contact with abrasive materials and products thousands, if not millions of times. I've scratched myself thousands of times, cut myself fewer times, cut myself badly enough to need first aid treatment fewer times, cut myself very rarely to need a bigger medical intervention, and so on. So these triangles make sense to our daily lives, and with examples that fit with new starters at work. So that description would have been fairly true when I was starting out age 16. The other good thing about them is they're very familiar and common. So lots of workplaces have them and they use them, some to good effect, some to less than good effect, but they are there, they are familiar, so you don't have to reinvent any wheels with anybody. If somebody didn't have one, would you automatically put it in? There's a question over that. But if they're already there, that's quite a good advantage if people are used to working with them. The other good thing, of course, is you can add your own layers on at the bottom. So, you can stick your near misses on, your unsafe behaviours, etc. So they are quite useful in that respect. However, they're not perfect. Let's have a think about why they might not be so good. One of the big problems with what's not so good about them is this. They were created the sort of middle part of the last century. So if you're in a workplace where you might have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, all exposed to similar hazards, in the space of a year or two, you've got a data set which is statistically relevant. If, however, your workplace looks a bit more like this, where you've got very few people with now a lot of different roles, a lot of overlapping roles, hazard profiles nowhere near as clear, you might take 200 or 300 years to get the same statistically relevant data set. Well, of course, that's no use at all because you're having to deal with the here and now of managing your safety. So there's a bit of a problem if you think about building your own triangle. If they lack statistical relevance, what can they actually tell us? Well, I guess one of the things they might tell us isn't about the injuries themselves, but if you've got a shape like this, if you plotted yours, this might be telling you that actually there's an issue about communication and trust. Because the only thing that's being reported here are the things that can't be hidden. So communication might be lacking. There's another big question mark, which has a bit of credence, I think, with the safety scientists of today. Are they relevant based on understanding of high hazard activities? And by this I mean there are some significant studies by clever people that are absolutely clear. The bulk of fatalities actually occur in work that is related to known high hazard activity. You've got your life-changing injuries, most of your fatalities, not a lot else. Therefore, there's a really strong challenge that the relevance of this triangle is irrelevant now. And I can see that. I also hear that scorecard pressure is a killer of many people's safety culture, and I've seen that as well. So given those two things, it does throw up a question. Does being a correct observer automatically make you part of the solution? No, it doesn't. Absolutely not. So merely observing that the triangle is irrelevant, that scorecard pressure is a problem, doesn't in itself make you part of the solution. One of the things I want to try and help us with joining the dots here is try and work out how can we take all of these issues and continue to be part of the solution. So we have a bit of a walk through a worked example, starting with the bottom of the triangle. I rock up at a site one day, I'm a clever lad, I can work out that this must be the visitors' car park, in spite of the lack of information that I'm being provided with. So I get parked up, I get my kit on, go and sign the book, and go and have a walk. And what I discover when I go and have a walk is that the pathway is barely marked. The paint that used to be there has been worn away and washed away and all things, and there are skips and there are bits of material and what have you, vehicles parked over the pathway, forcing people to walk out into places of danger. All bottom of the pyramid stuff. There's trip hazards there, poorly maintained path in parts, even when the painting's a bit better. All bottom of the triangle stuff. Get inside the site, and what I discover is that what had occurred to the visitors' car park sign wasn't just some stranger turning up in a van and not knowing his way around. That this seemed to be an endemic issue around the site, almost like a sport across the whole site to change the barriers and break the edges off if it was at all possible. But all bottom of the triangle stuff. Further around the site, I come across this, a very poor standards of housekeeping, deplorable use of a skip for an organisation that at the time had a zero waste to landfill policy. They had ambitions and goals. But what this showed me was what this showed me there was a very clear disconnect between goals, targets, posters, slogans, and what we were actually seeing on the ground. But nonetheless, still base of the triangle stuff. Further round, interesting one. People have to do a daily check. They stand on those pallets, lift the little flap up, and make a check of some instrumentation. They're not tall enough, so they get the pallets. They put the pallets down. Over time, the pallets decay a bit, rot a bit. Of course, the amusing thing for me at the time was that behind that photograph, what you can see there are tens of thousands of beautifully manicured concrete blocks, because that's what they made. Yet still, they'd taken that decision to use the pallets. Different part of the site and the broken ladder. Now, the purist might say, yeah, but the bottom end of the ladder is okay. And if you stand on that bottom rung, it would be fairly firm. The problem is, if you stand on the middle rung, your weight then, the relationship, because of your centre of gravity, starts to be between the bottom left and the top right, as opposed to both bottom legs. Which means you don't have to move very far before it tips to the side and tips you off. Into one of the main production areas, and here's a good honest foot soldier out there solving problems. So in order to operate that equipment and to keep it running, one of the routine activities seemed to be stand up on the platform there and do something with the feedstock material. And considering that I was sort of brand new head of health and safety, first time on site with a camera, it's fairly clear that this guy was very comfortable that this is how we do stuff around here. And it's, if you like, a hazardous activity, a hazardous behaviour. He's just trying to get the job done. But if he steps back at that point, that framework on the other side, that's going to hit him either around the base of the spine or anywhere up to the top of the head. So there isn't a comfortable way that he can fall off there. But it is still unsafe behaviour, base of the triangle stuff. We're not that far removed from behaviours like this, so I need to get a little bit higher, stand on the bucket, or behaviours like this. But again, it's still all unsafe behaviours, risk-taking, base of the triangle. We think of another known hazard of activity, exposure to energy. So this panel can be turned off but not locked off. This emergency stop isn't for emergencies, it's for extreme emergencies. Now, when I asked the people what that meant, what's the difference between an extreme emergency and emergency, nobody could tell me. Well, the message I was getting really clear was turning the power off is a bad thing. Turning the power off is something you only do if you really, really have to. They like power because they even used power access that had already been rejected in its testing. So power to them was really good. Now, where you have got lockable local isolation, it's important that it doesn't do this. So this person here, look, because the screws are missing out of the back, you can apply the lock and it will still rotate, so it'll energize. The picture on the right, okay, the guard's there, it's locked in place until you look a bit closer. The lock's actually hanging through the handle and not the locking point. So to the untrained eye, they can't see or can't really tell that that actually isn't locked at all. So that might as well be totally unlocked and open to anybody that cares to reach it. All still base of the triangle stuff. The next one, the interlock here. What we're looking at there, the metal connector is actually supposed to be screwed to the lid. So it's taken off the lid and left in the interlock. So when the lid lifts up, the interlock's still reading closed. And on this picture here, it's not awfully clear, but the plunger on the interlock there is deliberately held back with cable ties. So it's now reading that the cam on the gate is telling it it's closed, even though the gate is very obviously open. Some of these pictures, by the way, from my good friend Rob Shaw and from Phil Chambers, from their experiences, but most of them are from the sites that I've visited. It's all still base of the triangle stuff. But if a proportion of your unsafe behaviours relate to high hazard activities, you're getting near misses reported in the high hazard activities. Just because there's nothing in the middle, that doesn't mean that the top and the bottom cannot be related and both actually be a subset of the triangle. See, the object of the exercise isn't to prove why stuff doesn't work and throw it in the bin. The object of the exercise is to work out, if stuff's there anyway, how can we help it? How can we use it to help us improve safety? This is why I think it's important that they're linked. Now, there's no science behind this at all, and you may well have workplaces that defy this statement. But I can assure you that in 38 years, with different companies all over the world, different industries, I'm yet to see a single workplace that I considered to have high standards regarding high hazard activity, whilst at the same time tolerating low standards with everything else. So this is how I join the dots to work out, should I be telling people to cam their triangle, or should I be helping them to make it work if they've got one there anyway? Because this isn't about winning arguments, it isn't about an intellectual exercise to prove how clever we are. It's about how can we work in real time with an industry today and help them improve their safety. So that can work on that basis. And I'm really consciously aware of the scorecard pressure. I understand this. I've worked in it. I've worked with people that were good at it, and I've worked with people that really struggle with it. But if we think that, you know, the question is to zero, not to zero, we're wrong. That actually is not the question. It really isn't. You know, and it's not that I don't recognize that these mantras are there. It's not that I particularly believe in them. You know, I'll go through this now. You know, I've worked in places that have had posters and slogans like this, just like lots of other people. You know, we've all been there, that, you know, safety is our top priority. There's nothing so important we don't have time to do it safely. One sort of 100% safety, zero harm. Here's our target. Is it a goal? I've been there. I've listened to people discuss and debate. You know, is it a goal? Is it? And it degenerates into a theoretical argument. The people that use these slogans and it doesn't slow them down have broadly the same understanding as the people that hate the slogans. The only difference is they recognise that, you know, they're not working and living on the Care Bears movie. You know, they recognise that that's not where they're at today or where they're ever likely to get. They just don't let the argument get in the way, because they also recognise they're not in the Game of Thrones either. You know, it isn't either or. But it does throw that question up: where should the pointer be? What I want to reassure you is that, to a large degree, it doesn't matter where we think the pointer is. It's important that we think about it. This isn't about an intellectual argument to work out, can I evidence that I'm right or you're right, or, you know, it's not about that. The really important thing for me works through a bit from this basis. What is important is what we collectively think. So if the manager thinks it's 95, the supervisor thinks it's 75, and the people actually doing the hazardous activity think it's 50, that's a problem. And when we think about what we have to do is understand the things that have happened and recognise what is happening. Those processes of investigation, of safety walks, all those sorts of things, they're about achieving, to some degree, this shared understanding. This is what we're looking for, that shared understanding, so that everybody knows what everybody knows. We accept the work that has to be done. We accept the restrictions of regulation, of management, but we agree where we are, and that of itself isn't as important as, when we've agreed where we are, what that does is identify the delta, the gap that we've got left. And it's really important that we have that discussion, that understanding, that it's not just fed down as a zero harm, so you must believe it, but we really explore and decide for our workplace, what does that mean for everybody? Because when we have that collective discussion, what always happens is the combined understanding moves it even a bit more safer. We never all have a conversation and we agree to be less safe. What we do in the process of identifying the gaps that we've got left to work with, we intuitively close those gaps just a little bit further. And we take the gap that we're residually left with a bit more serious. So we know that when things change, or when things break down, or when something goes wrong, we recognise that we're straying into that territory, and we use all the tools that we've got, whether you would class it as risk assessment or judging work as done as opposed to work as imagined, all of those things, whatever your description is, we work with them to make sure that we've got a collective idea on how to really improve and make it work, as per those earlier behavioural models we saw half an hour ago. So they were the dots we started with. See, I've put a few lines to them, hopefully helped you break them apart in ways that are useful. So I often say with stuff I do with people, I hope you find it interesting, but it's no good unless you find it useful. Because some of the tools that safety have been around for a while, you know, some of the stuff that we've talked about are older than me. But there are new ideas out there that are very popular as well. And you'll see examples of all of them that are used in ways that add value. You'll also see examples of all of them used in ways that don't add value. There's no silver bullet with this. The reality is, it doesn't really matter if it's old or new, or if it's safety 1 or 2. It doesn't matter if you consider it to be safety traditionally or safety differently, to be honest. If you're using the tools that you have in a way that's helping you to understand the things that have happened, to recognize the things that are happening on your site, and to influence the things that you need to happen, then you'll be doing safety properly. That's all you need to do. Because when you're doing safety properly, you'll end up with a clearer understanding of your current culture, not just a bunch of graphs. You'll have a clear understanding of your culture, which will enable you to map a clear improvement plan. You'll have better ideas to increase your competency for safety at all levels of your organisation, all roles. You'll really work out how to use leading indicators to assist performance improvement, which then gives you the results of genuine integrity. So you eradicate the scorecard pressure by using proper indicators internally, by delivering the right results externally. That's what gets rid of the pressure. You'll end up with investigations that genuinely enlighten, safety walks that really engage, and risk assessments that do facilitate success. So if you'd like to discuss any of those things, or indeed anything else you'd like some help with, you can reach me at graham@safetyproperly.com or at 07490 110 121. So I like doing 1-to-1s. So that's the close of the presentation. We've now got time for questions.
Right, thank you for that, Graham. So yeah, as mentioned at the beginning, if you do have any questions, you can ask those using the question icon, which you will see to the right of your toolbar. I will also pop Graham's email address and telephone number that were just on screen in the chat function now as well. So whilst we're waiting for 1 or 2 questions to come through, Graham, would you like to tell us a little bit more about mentoring, the importance of it, and why you think it's what you get out of it as well, and that type of thing, because we do know that you do quite a lot of that too.
Okay, yeah, I can do that, Holly. Just let people out. A few sound problems during the whole of that running, and I see that it cut short a bit at the end, or it certainly cut short for me at the end anyway. Yeah, if I think about mentoring, you remember at the start of my input, I talked about starting work at 16 in a trade apprenticeship, and the whole basis of that sort of thing was that the individuals that held the skills of the trade agreed to pass those skills on to other people, not in return for any special trainer's payment or anything like that. That's how we were sort of inducted into a trade and brought up. And I feel very much the same about safety, that it's beyond just giving people some skills there and then to get to a next level of a task or an accreditation. It's more about supporting people and taking the time to explain some of the underpinning principles and philosophies of safety, so that as they're faced with different challenges at different parts of their career, that they can reflect back on that. And I believe that's very important, largely because I benefited greatly from that in my career. So when I started work, I had very good people that helped me above and beyond, and a number of those people I would still consider to be great mentors today. So I find it a very important part that we go away sometimes just from the commercial aspect of this and focus on how we actually help people, because the reality is safety in the UK currently, and I guess different parts of the world as well, has hit a bit of a stagnation. So for the last 10 years, even pre-COVID, things haven't improved. And the way that the workplaces are structured today, lots of people don't have big HR departments. So it is down to us, the experienced members of the profession, the experienced practitioners, to be able to put that on. Does that satisfy your question, Holly?
It does, thank you, Graham. So we have a question come through from Gary, who's asked, how receptive have operational been in your experience to your approach?
The operations have been very receptive. particularly because you take time to go and have a look. I find that people don't mind you going in, you're spending a bit of time with them, as long as they realise that you're genuinely seeking to understand and not just make some list of problems that are then going to come back and revisit them. I find it helps when they realise that I've actually done quite a lot of, if you like, shop floor, ground level work in the past. And they see then that I've got a genuine desire to understand. They also see that I invite often local management and supervision into that conversation as well, and they realise that actually we're all trying to achieve pretty much the same thing. And that, I think, is the beauty of that model that brings those two things together to work together for the task. So yeah, I don't experience many problems with the operations at all, thankfully.
Okay, great. And then another question has come from David. So why is injury the driver of measures of safety rather than what has been achieved, do you think?
Well, I think that there's two components of results and performance. And if we think about the hourglass idea, if we want to be taken seriously as a profession, the people that look in at companies only really want to see simple results that are comparable industry to industry. So they'll look at a balance sheet in an annual report, and they'll look for the profitability in there. Now, they'll trust that the things that are going on to achieve those results are good practices that are of integrity, robust, and they're not going to be embarrassed by falling foul of the law. And that's fine. Now, in the company, regardless of how the results are achieved, is a bit more important, because we have to then look at the performance that achieve those results. So, I would sometimes say there's only one thing more absurd than asking a frontline worker to care what the company's lost time injury frequency rate is, and that's asking the managing director not to. So the people at the top level of the hourglass, it's okay to just look at the results, as long as we look at have we got the right performance, do you need my help to deliver that? The guys in there want genuine KPIs of performance, so that the performance delivers the results. So if we demand results, but we can't validate the performance, it would be a fair indicator that things are being cheated and manipulated, and that's just a time bomb waiting to go off. If we say we just want performance, but we don't care about the results, we're probably not going to be taken seriously for 5-10 years. So the two things have to go together, but we need to focus the performance support on the people that need to have the input behaviours, usually the at-risk workers, and trust that then that delivers results that make us credible to the outside world.
Okay, great. And then the final question is from Andrew. How do we use this approach when we don't have the data or knowledge, like with COVID, to create the right behaviours from the outset?
I think if you look at something like COVID, on the one hand, you can say this was totally unexpected, it appeared out of nowhere, what do we do? There's another school of thought that says, well, the company I was working for in the late 90s had a global pandemic on its radar for risk registers, largely about product and supply chain. Now, if you look at what you would be required to cope in the event of a pandemic appearing in a matter of days and weeks, things about trust, the ability to discuss risk, to discuss control measures, to think about inclusion of what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So if we looked at it on that, if you like, that traditional risk assessment model, if we'd have got those methods working well in the first place, a pandemic appearing just means then that you have to make sure you have the right input going into it. The problem I think a lot of people had was, instead of going to things like the World Health Organization to look at what should the control measures be, we defaulted to listening to the government. And the government haven't got the same set of responsibilities as we have in the workplace. So they're dealing with a whole range of pressures and external factors that actually inside the gates we weren't dealing with. So I would have taken it very much on okay, what is the hazard here. How will it be transmitted? How can it be passed on, and how can it be caught? And I would be looking at those control measures rather than waiting for a government idea to come up with something.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Graham, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. And thank you to everyone for joining us today as well. The recording will be available shortly, and we'll send you a link once that's ready so that you can recap in your own time if you'd like to. Okay, enjoy the rest of your days, and goodbye.